Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the first show of the Montpelier Happy Hour for 2026. I hope 2026 has started well for all of you, and I hope the rest of the year goes well too, given all the givens we all know that are out there in the world. I am your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. I want to welcome John Walters from the Vermont Political Observer to the show. Happy 2026, John.
Thank you. Same to you.
You looked a moment there like you were meditating, like, breathe, breathe. It's 2026. Just breathe.
Well, we're a week into the new year, and we've already got one invasion and one senseless fatal shooting. So,
I was on a very serious note. I was thinking last night as I was doing some prep for this show about a conversation you and I had had about chaos and leading through chaos. And, the downside of it, or the macabre side of it, is you hope that the chaos shifts elsewhere so you get a chance to breathe in your own world. And um, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And especially with the shooting, I was just kind of sitting with that, also that sense of heartbreak
hmm
around just how damaging that chaos can be.
yeah,
Um, and
just kind
yeah,
of constant background noise that wears you down.
yeah, yep. And yeah, I think we'll just leave that right there
Yep.
and shift to, I suspect, our lawmakers who reconvened the second half of the biennium this week
hmm
will be responding to a lot of that chaos as they go through the year. Um, I think we will be talking a lot about the State of the State address and education in this episode, but we I suspect as the year goes on, what we think we were going to talk about is going to shift. do you
Yeah.
do you dare put any sticks in the ground and say here's what it's going to be?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of different things, both related to Trump and Washington, D.C. and all that. One is, what is the financial impact going to be on Vermont? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we know the impact on tourism dollars has been substantial,
Yes.
very harmful to Vermont. We don't have as much of a measure on like the impact of the off again, on again tariffs. But the big thing is, what is the federal financial situation going to do to Vermont? And we keep waiting and waiting and waiting for some kind of sign on that, and we don't get it. And it's just a big storm cloud hanging over our heads. And, the governor in his State of the State address spent literally no time talking about that. He talked very briefly about the importance of civility in politics, but that was it. And on one hand, I kind of see how that makes sense because we really don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on the other hand, it seems like something we ought to be talking about and planning for, and I'm sure the administration is trying to plan for it internally. But in terms of like how we treat the Budget Adjustment Act, which is coming up, that's sort of the fine tuning the current year fiscal budget that the legislature has to do early in the session, and then the next year budget, which they will have to do eventually. There's really no talk except, try to be ready for whatever happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's really, the best course, but that's the course we're on.
Yeah. So, just for listeners, I may have said this on the show, so if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. But when we talk about like the uncertainty of the environment between the federal government and finances, um, so I have been doing my interviews and speaking to a number of organizations who have all said in like June or July, they're supposed to hear about certain federal grants, usually from the USDA, but other departments as well. And I was interviewing these folks in November and December, and they had yet to hear whether or not they were going to get those grants. And I think the thing that makes it was making it tough for them is they hadn't been told no. So there's no certainty there. They haven't been told yes. They're just sort of in this limbo. And so they're sitting there saying, well, do we self fund what we were going to use the grant money for and move those programs forward? Do we cancel those programs? And so that just, I'm just sharing that as kind of a practical way that if you were working on your own organization or your own budget and you have, you know, money just kind of sitting there going, yeah, I don't know, like, how would you move forward?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah.
And a little sort of extra concern on top of all the background noise we've all been dealing with since the 2024 election is, it seems pretty clear that the Republicans are going to take a shellacking in the midterms in
Mm,
November. And Trump and his people have to be aware of that. And they
yeah.
have to be thinking we're running short of time. And I would not be surprised. I mean, the invasion of Venezuela is an obvious marker. Uh,
Hmm.
there's a lot of concern out there that that was a dry run for an invasion of Cuba. And we've got Greenland sitting out there. Is Trump going to accelerate what he's been doing in order to try to get as much done as possible before the midterms and before the prospect of a Democratic Congress emerges,
Hmm.
next January? How does that play out around here? Do we get, more cuts? Do we get uh, more severe immigration enforcement with all that that implies these days? Um, you know, um, he certainly has a low opinion of Vermont. We know that. So if there's any way he can stick it to us, I'm sure he will try.
Hmm.
And we may be in for a bumpy ride, as they say.
Yes. So on that note, I wasn't able to watch the Senate, but I did watch the House reconvene on Tuesday. Oh, it's already Friday. This week is a bit of a
Yep.
mush. Um, and, once again was just reminded about how much they do because there was that, I don't know if you saw it, John, but there was a moment um, where I think it was the clerk was just bringing up bills
Mm-hmm.
and they were being assigned to committees, but it was like boom, 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 boom.
Yep.
And that's even before you get to the big topics of like education and federal finances.
Yeah.
Um, do you
Yeah.
think? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
Well, just to note, the vast majority of those bills are going to go absolutely nowhere.
That was my question. Yeah.
Any legislator can propose a bill about anything, and
Hmm.
they do. We get hundreds of them introduced every year, and uh, the committees only have so much bandwidth. They set their priorities at the beginning of the session. They know that they're going to probably seriously take up maybe a handful of bills.
Yeah.
They'll have one major priority and a few other things will get through. And otherwise, each committee room has a bulletin board of death on the wall. And that's where they put all, a sticky note for each bill that's before the committee. And that the vast majority of those sticky notes are never going to move. I think they're actually index cards,
I
not
think they're
sticky.
index cards too. Yeah.
Yeah, the vast majority are never going to go anywhere. And that's just the way things work. That's the way things are in all legislatures. And I
Hmm.
think that's, going to be even more, if anything, even more the case this year because, the governor's put all his eggs in the education reform basket and we've got all the budget uncertainty. And, you know, um, I think anything else that gets done is going to be, you know, surprising, really.
Hmm.
I don't know. The governor hasn't laid out an agenda of any sort for anything other than moving forward with school reform.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the legislative leadership is really prepared to push an agenda when they know that if they push anything that's really progressive, the governor will veto it, and that'll be the end of it. So I think the legislative leadership is going to have its hands full, and we are turning the page to education. I guess um, they're going to have their hands full because this Act 73, which they passed last year, which would calls for new district maps for all the school districts in the state, is going to probably result in a lot fewer districts and a
Hmm.
lot less local governance and local control. And it's widely unpopular. The redistricting task force that met with the public last summer was met with like a combination of consternation and anger about this whole thing. Some legislative leaders are acknowledging that Act 73 is really unpopular and is going to be difficult to carry forward with. Leadership seems really invested in it and wanting to move forward with it. The governor is unwilling to do anything that doesn't involve following through on Act 73. So it's going to be a really heavy political lift. And, that's, you know, leaving aside the question for the moment of whether Act 73 is a good idea or not,
Hmm.
um, just moving it through the legislature is going to be really hard work and is going to probably occupy a lot of leadership's time.
Yeah. You know, I re-listened to the State of the State address this morning, um,
There's
with my
enough
coffee,
to wake me up, yes.
and thought, wow, this is how I spend my mornings. But in some ways, I really appreciated the State of the State and the governor spending that much time on education, because I have felt a little bit like I wasn't, not that I didn't know where he stood, but I hadn't heard enough from him about kind of like his thoughts on education and moving forward. And yes, I know there was Act 73, but I just felt like some of what felt unclear to me was clarified, from his perspective, whether we agree with it or not. So I appreciated that. But the one thing I was feeling a little kind of meh about, and this isn't just at Scott's feet, I would put this at the legislature's feet as well, that remember the commission way back when, that you so beautifully said the legislature on one of your recent posts. I think you described the legislature putting a pillow over its face, the commission on the future of education.
Yeah.
Um, if folks remember, what, a year and a half ago they
Well,
founded it.
2024, the
Thank
legislature
you.
created this commission, which was supposed to take a wide-ranging, all-encompassing look. They gave them a year and a half to do the work, and the commission set out and did its best to follow through. And then in the winter of 2025, the legislature changed course completely.
Everybody
Act,
freaked out about property taxes,
yeah,
and they changed course completely.
and Act 73 dramatically reduced the remit of the commission. Most of the people on the commission, or a lot of them, resigned and were
Mhm.
replaced. They were kind of at loose ends because their charge was greatly reduced and their authority was greatly reduced. Um, they issued their final report in mid-December, and it was completely ignored. There was no news coverage, there were no press conferences, nobody has even mentioned it.
I
Uh,
have yet to read it, I fully admit.
yeah, and um, I mean, if you look at this, as I did in my post about this, you know, the legislature did something that I think was smart in setting up this commission 2 years ago
Hmm.
and giving it a long time to do its work.
Yes.
And if they had just carried through with that, and I know the governor wouldn't have, would have wanted something else, and that would have been difficult. But if they just carried through with that, imagine us on the alternate planet Earth. Um, they would have gotten a comprehensive, thorough look at the
Mhm.
entire public education system and all the issues around cost and governance and quality of equality of opportunity, equity of opportunity, and educational quality and everything.
Yeah.
Uh, and they would have had that going into this session. Instead, they kneecapped the commission. They set up the task force to draw new district lines. The task force was given only 6 months to do its job, concluded that it couldn't do the job well in 6 months, and basically punted it back to the legislature. So they could have had a comprehensive, thorough document as a starting point. Instead, they pretty much got nothing. And they're going to, I guess, leadership and the governor are firmly focused on redrawing district lines, and I guess that's probably what's going to end up happening.
Hmm.
Um, I give the governor credit for the State of the State address taking ownership of this. And
Mm-hmm.
he spent the entire speech on that, except for a couple of opening remarks, which is very unusual for him not to mention any other issues in any depth at all.
Hmm.
So, and he made the case, whether you believe him or not, he made the case first and foremost about educational quality rather than just cost savings, which is
Yeah.
what he's always talked about.
Yeah.
And, the problem is, I mean, what he's selling is that this reform, this redrawing of district lines will save a lot of money, which we can then not only reinvest in education, but also reinvest in other government priorities. And that's absolutely unproven. This thing might cost more money
Hmm.
because if you have bigger school districts, you might have fewer administrators, but they might be paid more. There might be more support staff, and most crucially, if you're going to redraw district lines and consolidate schools, you're probably going to have to build a bunch of new school buildings, or at least improve existing buildings, because
Right.
the current buildings are not where they would need to be in order to serve a bigger district. So, there's no proof at all that this is going to save a dime, let alone the kind of massive savings that the governor is predicting.
Hmm.
Um, but that's the basis we're going to go forward on, and that seems to be the course that our leadership has set for us. And we're probably going to have to live with it, although the Progressive Party this week came out and said we should repeal Act 73 and start over again. I don't think that's going to happen.
No. But I can see why they said that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a welcome thing because politically, the problem is we're heading into an election year,
Hmm.
and legislative leadership is very much in line with the governor on Act 73.
Right.
Doesn't leave a whole lot of room for the Democrats writ large to run against the governor, to challenge the governor, because, if the Senate leadership and the House leadership are on board with Act 73, then how can we say Act 73 is a terrible idea and, contradict the word of our top elected Democrats?
Hmm.
So, I don't know where the opposition is going to come from, aside from the fact that this is widely unpopular and a lot of constituents are going to be complaining about it if it goes forward, and worried about it. Um, but, that would set up a scenario where when we head into the election season, everybody's unpopular rather than like the governor getting blamed for this. So I don't know, and that seems to be that has been set up by the governor and leadership as the dominant issue of this
Hmm.
session. Anything else that gets done is going to be on the margins, and after that gets taken care of. So
Yeah.
we'll see where it's going to again be a bumpy ride in Montpelier. So um, I don't know.
I want to say something about the State of the State address, but before I do that, I think some of my concerns about the education reform process parallels everything you just said, John, in that, you know, I feel one of the many reasons the commission was originally founded is that as we've been doing education reform, even before the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
like back to the pupil weighting study, it's been coming to light that our education funding and system in general has been sort of hodgepodged and built on top of each other. And so there was a lot in there that people were like, yeah, that no longer works. Those numbers are no longer based on actual students, and so there was just a lot of like wheat and chaff that needed to be separated out. Um, and I think the commission really had the potential to do that. And then on top of that, when you add into the the school district redistricting task force,
Mhm.
um, it really disappointed me how their recommendations were received. They were not received in a spirit of curiosity or evaluation. They were received as, this is not Act 73. How dare you?
Yep.
Which I don't know. I think if you look at the recommendations, they're not really, they're saying what you proposed in Act 73 may not be great. Here's another alternative
Yep.
based on our research. I don't think they said Act 73 should be blown up, but that's how
No.
it was received. And so I am very concerned as we go forward from this moment with our education reform that, like you said, we've already locked in
Mhm.
to a path, even if that path has not been fully evaluated.
Yep. Yep. And past education reform efforts going back to dealing with the Brigham decision, which was what, 30 years ago, more or
Yeah,
less, um, have all been piecemeal and have all set loose unintended consequences that we then had to deal with, and we had
mm-hmm.
to try to adjust course. And we're doing it again.
Yeah.
And it's never worked before. And now, the definition of insanity is right there in front of us. And I do want to
Bang
mention,
head here.
yes, and I do want to mention one thing. The governor led the charge in blaming the task force for failing to do its job, which it did not. It,
Right.
it followed the law and it issued a report. He doubled down on that in the State of the State address after his call for civility in politics. He blasted the task force for making a political decision to protect the current status quo.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he said. That is a lie. There is nobody, including, people in teachers' unions and school administrators, there is nobody who thinks the current system should be maintained and preserved as is. Everyone acknowledges the need for some sort of widespread, comprehensive reform.
Yeah.
Not everyone agrees that Act 73 is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, don't engage in the kind of political attacks that you rail against, Governor.
And he
Um,
did the same thing when he vetoed Act 91 about reorganizing how we serve folks who are unhoused,
yeah,
saying, "Oh, it doesn't deal with the motel program." It totally dealt with the motel program. Mm-hmm.
yes, but he says it in a measured tone, so
Yes.
it's fine.
That's one thing I wanted to say about this particular state of the state. And I'm guessing a lot of the credit goes to his speechwriters, whoever helped him write it. Um, I always want to give credits to the writers, you know me. Um, I have to say, compared to previous years, this speech was very well crafted. And I say that from both a technical standpoint of how it kind of opened its arguments, moved through its arguments, and then closed them at the end, just that kind of very technical craft
Mhm.
aspect, but emotionally, how it was crafted, I thought was, um, whether I agreed with it or not, I was like, oh, he's leveled up compared to previous years, in my opinion, in that there was a very clear, we're doing this for the kids. And yes, I know change is hard, but it basically came around with, and I've heard this in just about every town meeting when there's a school vote, that basically was, if you don't do what I think you should do, you don't like our children. Was kind of like the very bare bones undercurrent in this speech, and just the way it was laid out, I was like, oh, there's well done. Whether or not you agree with the argument, the speech itself was much better put together, much more
Yeah.
yeah, leveled up. That's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, and I wrote that at least the governor understands the assignment. He knows.
Mm,
I mean, reading into it, he knows that Act 73 is unpopular.
mm-hmm.
Knows that arguing solely on the basis of cost is a non-starter. So he focused on educational quality. I think, devoting the entire speech to one subject is an indication that he really knows that he needs to put his shoulder to the wheel on this if he wants it to happen.
Yeah.
This is, for the moment, setting aside the question of whether it ought to happen or whether it's a good idea. If he wants this to happen, he's going to have to work his ass off making it happen. He's going to have to jawbone the legislature. He's going to have to work with the legislature to craft something that's acceptable to everybody. He's going to have to get out in public and make the case and answer his critics and engage with people in a forthright way. And the State of the State address was a very strong first step in that path.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if he carries through with it, but he knows what he has to do, and that was step one.
Yeah. And he set forward a very strong narrative that, anyone can follow, even if they just, you raise your head up once a week to see what the news is doing, and then you go back to trying to manage your own life. You can still be like, oh, it's about education, and down you go again.
Yep, and if you want to be cynical about this, the governor, assuming he runs for re-election, which
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody assumes he's going to, that will be his sixth term.
Yeah.
Uh, and has any governor ever served that long? Howard Dean served 5.5 terms. I doubt it, because until not that long ago, it was common practice for governors to serve one term and be out.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he's closer to the end of his governorship than he is to the beginning, clearly. Um, if we do follow through on Act 73, it's going to take some time to draw new district maps, to reshuffle administration and set up, buildings. And, all of that stuff is going to take a couple of years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's probably going to really seriously hit home, um, you know, in time for the next governor to deal with the consequences. So, but I think he sees this. If you think that politicians think about legacy, which I think they do,
Mm-hmm.
I think he is investing. He's making this his legacy issue, and if he can
Hmm.
transform schools and in a way that saves money and improves outcomes and opportunity, then he will have accomplished something really big. Um, Again, that's whether you think Act 73 is the right course or not. But that's where he's at. And like I said, I don't see where the political opposition is going to come from, aside from the Progressive Party.
Yeah.
It's looking very much, and we're going to talk about this in the second half of the show. Spoiler, teaser, professional quality teaser, talking about the emerging look of the possible Democratic ticket statewide for 2026,
Mm-hmm.
which so far does not include a high-profile candidate for governor, and it
No.
seems more and more likely there will not be another a high-profile candidate for governor. There will be another person who most of us have not heard of, who doesn't have any money and doesn't really have the strong backing of the Democratic establishment. And so if the governor was risking his political capital on this, I don't think there's anybody in a position to take it away from him. So,
I think unfortunately, and we have to hear from underwriters in a moment, but I think a lot of the pushback, if it comes against Act 73, it will be at the local level.
yep.
And unfortunately, I don't know about you, but I have been hearing in the discourse a little bit of, well, of course nobody wants to lose their local school, which is true, is part of the conversation. But I think there's also part of the conversation of people being like, you've changed things before and it didn't help. So, what are you doing? And so I don't know that that local um, pushback should necessarily be ignored either. Though I do know there are some folks who would like to.
Well, and that local pushback is probably, given the lack of a credible Democratic opponent to Governor Scott and the fact that this is happening locally, it's probably going to mostly target sitting lawmakers in the House
Mm,
and Senate. They're the ones who meet with the constituents on, regularly, and they're the ones who hear from constituents, and they're the ones who are going to have to vote up or down on whatever emerges as the follow through on Act 73.
mm-hmm,
Uh, and they're going to have to answer for what the legislature does, and that throws a whole big monkey wrench into what we think of as the emerging narrative for the 2026 campaign, which you would think would be, nationally it's going to be a referendum on Trump with probably the Republicans losing a lot. You would think that would be good for the Democrats in Vermont. I'm not sure whether that's going to outweigh whatever backlash there is from the Act 73 process.
mm-hmm.
So, seeing a real, uh, a lot of anger among voters, and exactly who they're going to wind up targeting, I am not sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we
Well,
will talk more about the election in the
in the
second
second
half of
half. Well
the show.
done. So, the Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW, we're going to hear from some underwriters. We'll be right back. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters. And if you're just joining us, I am speaking with John Walters from the Vermont Political Observer. And we've just been sort of working through the first week of the new biennium, which still feels a little slow, still feels a little laid back and relaxed. We'll have to see how we're both doing in like May if we're sitting here like having to hold our chins up um, for the broadcast. Well, John, thank you for being here. Before we dive back into the conversation, quickly, I want to thank BCTV for taking the video version of this show and sharing it with media centers around the state, and remind listeners that the views and opinions of everyone on the Montpelier Happy Hour belong to the hosts and the guests and no one else. There you go. So, John, you know, we're in the second half of the biennium, which means a new election cycle has kind of started up, but will definitely be starting up once the legislature closes in the spring or adjourns in the spring.
In the last week, we have had two prominent Democrats announce bids for statewide office. So
Yes.
if that's not the starting gun, I don't know what is.
Well, that's one thing. Before we dive into who they are and what they're running for, I did want to just touch base with you because I think you know this better than I do. You tend to follow the statewide races more than I do. Um, there's often been this whispered tradition of how you don't announce a bid while the legislature is in session.
Mhm.
Um, is that still true? And are these people breaking type?
Um, Maybe. I think part of the reason they announced when they did is that they wanted to get it out of the way before the legislature,
Hmm.
rather than competing with the new session.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that it's an absolute political necessity if you're serious about running a statewide campaign that you announce before May or June. That is a convenient fiction and nothing more, that nobody thinks about politics until the legislature adjourns. The governor likes to say that, uh, so that he can, brush aside any questions about whether he's running for reelection or not,
Hmm.
uh, until he announces. But, purely as a practical matter, you know, statewide major party candidates have to file their papers by late May. It's
Hmm.
usually just before Memorial Day. If you wait until the legislature is out of session, last year they were still in session on Memorial Day, I think. Um, if you wait until they're out of session, even if they adjourn on time in like late April, early May,
Hmm.
you still got like literally 2 or 3 weeks to get your ducks in a row and get out there, and you don't know who else is running or anything like that. And then you've got literally a couple of months until the primary if you have a primary opponent. And that's really a small amount of time to create a political operation and raise money. Um, if you're running a state, especially if you're running statewide.
Hmm.
So, um, I don't think anybody really believes that our politicians concern themselves totally with the people's business until the final gavel is comes down, and then they turn their attention to politics.
Hmm.
It's all politics all the time. So, anyway, yeah, clearly things are getting off to a strong and early start, with one exception, which is who's running as a Democrat for governor. But we will get to that. And it's a rare time. It's a rare year where there are actually a couple of uh, statewide offices that Democrats can run for with a good chance of winning.
Hmm.
So, you know, um, in recent cycles, the statewide offices have all been locked up in Democratic hands except for the governorship. And so there wasn't any opportunity for Democrats, ambitious Democrats, to move up the ladder. And now there are a couple of opportunities. So, and people have jumped in.
Hmm. Well, yes. So I think that turns us to the lieutenant governor
Mm-hmm.
position and the position of auditor. Doug
Yep.
Hoffer has announced that he will not be running for reelection.
Yep.
And as far as we know, the lieutenant governor seat is not willingly opening, but it looks like we've already got a race started. So how about we just start with auditor? Actually, I find that an interesting position because it is not as glamorous as say lieutenant governor or even like secretary of state, governor, that type of statewide office, and yet it's a real workhorse of an office,
Yeah.
and it provides data in a state that does not always have a lot of data about itself.
Yep.
Um, so let's talk. And Hoffer's been there for quite a while.
I think 2012
Yeah, that sounds right.
was first elected.
Hmm.
Um, and he's retiring. I think that he has been a very good auditor.
Yeah.
Um, he is a progressive. He runs as a progressive slash Democrat, but he is, whether it's capital P or small p, progressive, who believes that government needs to be strong and robust and do a lot of things, and therefore has the obligation to do them as efficiently as possible.
Hmm.
And that's how he has conducted his term as auditor. And yeah, there's a real opportunity to be a force for good government, and that's what he has been. Now he has been often ignored by the powers that be, but he does what he can. And 5 years ago, he hired Tim Ashe, former state senator from Chittenden County, former Senate President pro tem. He hired Tim Ashe to be his deputy. Uh, it was clear from that moment until this that Tim Ashe was the heir apparent. Hoffer was already talking wistfully about spending more time on the golf course back then. and I don't blame him. Um, so, when it became clear that Hoffer was going to retire, then it was expected that Tim Ashe would run for auditor. And indeed, a week ago today, as we are taping this on Friday, he formally announced that he's running for auditor. And I expect him to win the nomination. We'll see who else runs. There are whisperings about other candidates, and it is an opportunity for someone to move into the ranks of statewide office holders. And if you are interested in financial matters related to state government, it is a great position to hold. Um, so, but Tim Ashe would seem to have the inside track as someone who has run for statewide office, held the top position in the state Senate, and seems to be very well connected within party circles, statewide and especially in Chittenden County. So he will be a formidable candidate, let's put it that way. And we shall see if anyone else emerges. There have been whispers, nothing direct, about Emily Kornheiser from Brattleboro, who is chair of the House Ways and Means Committee and has a strong interest in, matters financial relating to state government. I think she has the skills and talents to be an excellent auditor. Whether she chooses to make a run against Tim Ashe, or you'd have to say she'd be the underdog. But, mm-hmm. She might decide to do it. And I don't doubt that she would run a strong and formidable campaign. So we shall see. Tim Ashe is out there. Presumably, you have to put him in pole position if you want the racetrack analogy.
Mm. Imagining a race between Tim Ashe and Emily Kornheiser, actually, in a way, I'd like to see that, mainly because I think if they debated, it would be legitimately interesting conversations. And that's one thing I feel we don't have enough of in our Vermont campaigns is really in-depth debate that not debate as in I'm right, you're wrong, but like what are the issues and how would we solve them, and that kind of more meaty conversations. And I can imagine that happening between them too. So part of me would like to see that for the debate alone.
And Emily Kornheiser, when she had a primary challenger for re-election in 2024, she went out and raised an incredible amount of money and basically buried her primary opponent and sailed to re-election. So she's got some chops, running in Brattleboro. She's only really been seriously challenged that one time, but she's clearly got some chops. She must have strong connections from being Ways and Means chair, which is one of the most powerful committee chairs in the legislature. So it would be interesting. I agree. Let's root for interesting.
Yes, I think rooting for interesting would be actually a lot of fun. Before we move on to the lieutenant governor's race, I want to talk to you quickly about a point you raised on the Vermont Political Observer about, my words, not yours, the importance of Tim Ashe running as, I think he's a DP, Democrat, progressive. And what that could mean for Vermont's Progressive Party. I thought that was an interesting point you made.
Yeah. A party, in order to achieve major party status, which is very crucial, it ensures you align on the ballot and ensures that you can have a primary if you want one. It puts you up there with the Democrat and the Republican if you're the progressive. Right until 2024, the progressives could claim two statewide office holders, Doug Hoffer and then Lieutenant Governor David Zuckerman. They were running on the Democratic and progressive tickets, which meant that a progressive candidate for statewide office, what you have to do in order to gain major party status is in the previous election, you have a statewide candidate who gets at least 5% of the vote. So, which is very difficult for like the Liberty Union Party, but is manageable for the progressives, especially if they have an incumbent on the ballot, that's virtually a slam dunk.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get 5% of the vote. So they had Zuckerman and Hoffer, and that ensured the progressives would maintain their status as a major party. This year, Zuckerman lost in 2024. Doug Hoffer's retiring. So if there were no PDs or DPs on the statewide ballot, then the progressives would be in serious jeopardy of losing major party status, which would knock them off the ballot in 2028 and quite possibly, doom them to, long or perhaps perpetual political exile.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they don't have that many elected officials outside of Burlington right now. So that would be a tremendous blow.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming that Tim Ashe continues to run as a dual affiliated candidate, then that would all but assure the progressives of retaining major party status. So, that I threw out a couple of conspiracy theories. What if the Democrats offer Tim Ashe some ungodly bribe, financial or political, to drop the P? Or, what if the Democrats really strongly get behind a Democrat who is not a progressive to, perhaps win the primary away from Tim Ashe?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a tremendous blow for the Progressive Party. So, that's the importance of Tim Ashe running and winning as a dual affiliated candidate.
Mm-hmm.
So,
One thing about when I was reading your post, I thought that was interesting insight. It also made me realize that down here in Windham County, we also have um, one or two candidates who are a PD or a DP.
yeah.
But it made me realize that we haven't really heard much from the Progressive Party as a whole, in the
Mhm.
sense of here's our platform, this is what makes us different from the Dems and the Republicans. Maybe that's happening in Chittenden County, but I don't think I've been seeing much of that. Have you, John?
Um, I can't say that I have, but when political parties do stuff, it often attracts little to no attention,
Good
and that
point.
includes the Republicans and the Democrats. But the progressives do have a new party chair and a new executive director, which is a paid staff position
Mm-hmm.
for the first time in many years. They came out with a press release this week in which they actively are opposing Act 73, the education reform bill, and calling for its repeal. So that's a very forthright, very progressive stance. And, it's the beginning of what might be an effort to raise their profile in some way or other. They do have new blood. Maybe they have new thoughts. The old people were fine. Tony Polino was party chair, and he's a lion of the progressive movement.
Mm-hmm.
Josh Ronsky had been executive director for a long time. But now they got new people, and we'll see if they have new ideas.
Thank you. Let's move on to the lieutenant governor race.
Yeah.
Uh, People may recognize the name Molly Gray. She ran for it was governor, was correct
Well,
originally? Or
she ran for lieutenant
oh,
governor.
that's right.
I'm gonna. I should have looked up the bio before I started this, but I believe she ran for lieutenant governor and won in 2022. When 2022 or 2020, David Zuckerman ran for governor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was 22. So there was an opening for lieutenant governor. Molly Gray ran. Tim Ashe ran.
That's
Uh,
right.
Brenda Siegel ran, I believe, and Molly Gray won the primary.
Did
And,
Molly Gray run against Becca in a certain
well, you're getting ahead of it here.
Oh,
She
okay, sorry.
she won. She was lieutenant governor for one term, 2022, 2024. In 24, there was an opening for Congress because Peter Welch was running for Senate. three prominent Democrats threw their hats in the ring. Becca Balint, uh, state senator at the time, State Senator Keisha Hinsdale, and Molly Gray, lieutenant
Okay.
governor. Becca Balint swept the primary handily, and Molly Gray was then out of office, after her term expired as lieutenant governor.
Mm-hmm.
But, she's still very young. She's 41 years old now. And so, it was pretty much a given that she would return to politics sometime, somewhere. And it was just a question of where and when. And, the Democrats, I would have to think, place a very high priority on taking back the lieutenant governorship in 2026. John Rogers, a former Democrat turned Republican, scored the upset over David Zuckerman in 2024. He's
Mm-hmm.
a first term incumbent lieutenant governor. Um, and I think the Democrats would dearly like to, regain that seat. Um, Preferably from their point of view with a plain old Democrat rather than a progressive Democrat or the Democrat progressive. Um, so Molly Gray has formally entered the race with a really impressive list, like close to 50 state senators and lawmakers and representatives on her side, including some very notable progressive and lefty names. It's not all like centrist Democrats, which is the label she got, firmly cemented on her when she, in her first couple of runs for office. But, she's got a lot of the big names in sort of like capital P and small p progressive politics, including Tanya Wajowski, who's the only state senator who is primarily a progressive
Right.
person. She's got Connor Casey from Montpelier, who is a very strongly progressive Democrat. State Senator Becca White from Windsor County, who is a very forthright leftist Democrat. And they are all on board with Molly Gray, which
Mm-hmm.
is a little bit surprising to see that. You would think that there might be room. Maybe David Zuckerman runs again. Maybe somebody else more firmly associated with the left wing of Democratic politics might try for lieutenant governor. But it kind of looks like the field is wide open and being ceded to Molly Gray.
Interesting.
Uh, whether that's because she has so many connections politically, whether everybody thinks, well, it's her turn,
Mm-hmm.
whether they think she's a strong candidate, which I think she is.
Mm-hmm.
I think I saw a glimmer of something else. And this was, a couple of months ago, she made an appearance on another Vermont podcast. And she talked about her work. She's been working with an Afghan refugee resettlement organization,
Right.
which, if you're, is kind of a very progressive thing to do, for
Mm-hmm.
someone who's kind of labeled as a centrist. And she really talked quite eloquently about the things she had seen and learned working with Afghan refugees in Vermont. And, it made me think, it made me wonder if there isn't more to Molly Gray than there was in 2022, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe there was more to Molly Gray than she showed in 2022. She kind of came across as slickly packaged and,
Mm.
biography first and policy second. And there really wasn't a strong policy profile to her campaign for lieutenant governor
Yeah.
or her campaign for Congress for that matter. And, maybe she's learned some lessons. Maybe she's had some life lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, People get a chance to grow and change. And I'm not going to deny that to Molly Gray. Um, I think it's also a good thing, as I wrote about this, if we return to kind of the Vermont tradition of people getting second chances in state politics.
Yeah.
It used to be pretty common for someone to run for a statewide office and lose, and then run again and win.
Mm-hmm.
The first time is training wheels. It's getting your name out there. It's getting people familiar with who you are, and then you can win the next time.
Hmm.
More recently, it's kind of like, well, if you lose a race, you're a loser, and that's it.
Right.
And
One and done.
so, if she can make a comeback as someone who's way younger than the average age of the average political figure in Vermont, then I think that is in itself a good thing
Hmm.
for our politics. It might make, for instance, prominent Democrats feel a little more optimistic about running against Phil Scott in the future because they might think that they will get a second chance if they make a good showing of it.
Hmm.
So we shall see. It's still early, and there may be other candidates in the race. I think, again, as with Tim Ashe for auditor, I think that Molly Gray has to be considered the early favorite, but that's really all we can say right now.
Because we are so early in the race.
Yes. And then, of
Um,
course, the other statewide offices are currently held by Democrats who Secretary of State Sarah Copeland Hanses has already announced she's running for reelection. Treasurer Mike Pichak and Attorney General Charity Clark have not said, but it seems pretty obvious that they're going to run for reelection. There's
hmm,
sort of speculation and thought that Mike Pichak might run for governor, but it is looking more and more like that is not going to happen.
right.
So, they're probably going to, stick where they are and run for reelection against unknown Republicans and win new terms.
Hmm. So we have just a few minutes left, John, and we're at the start of a new year and the second half of the biennium. Besides education, besides Act 73, are there other things on your radar that you're just keeping an eye on to see how they will unfold?
Well, there, I mean, there's the ongoing budget issue, which is going to be, thrown into more chaos than usual because of Trump.
Hmm.
Um, and the governor has not even given the slightest hint of how he's going to approach that if we do get into a situation where serious cuts have to be made or serious money has to be found. He's made it clear that he's willing to invest some of the money that's on hand into paying down the projected property tax increase this year,
Hmm.
as they did last year. Um, so I don't know. I doubt that there's much bandwidth for any other major initiatives this year. There is some talk, especially given what has happened in Minneapolis and Portland, Oregon, in recent days,
Yeah.
of some kind of legislation regarding the state's cooperation with federal immigration and border authorities. But I think that anything that is done in that regard is going to run up against a brick wall. And Phil Scott, he
Mm.
may not publicly like how the feds do their business, but he is not willing to try to put any limits on what they do or on what the state does in cooperation with them.
Hmm.
So, that's going to probably take up a lot of oxygen, but probably not go anywhere. Um, and, to be honest, there are many other things that could use attention. There's housing and there's substance abuse and there's, the whole array of challenges that we face. But I doubt that there will be anything serious done until and unless we dispose of education reform and Act 73 in one way or another. And given the way the legislature generally approaches contentious issues, I don't think they're going to get anything done anytime soon. I think it's probably going to be another mad dash to the goal line at the end of the session, which is not a great way to make policy, but that's human nature.
Yeah.
So,
Well, as always, John Walters from the Vermont Political Observer, thank you so much for being on the show this week. Remind us where people can find your work.
well, my blog is called the Vermont Political Observer, and the web address is thevpo.org, easily discoverable through a search engine or whatever. Um, I'll have to say, Molly Gray's campaign put out a press release this morning about the initial reaction to her entering the race for lieutenant governor, and they quoted me. Wow,
Wow.
brief brush with fame, along with BT Digger in 7 Days and everybody else who covered her announcement.
Mm-hmm.
So people do read what I write.
Yes, yes, they do, John. They actually do. And I know this because you have a comment section as well on your blog, and I see the comments.
You see most of the comments. I do have comment moderation, and there are occasional ones I don't let through, but only if they're like more uh, ad hominem attack and less about the substance of what I wrote.
Mm-hmm. Fair
I,
enough.
I have fans and I have hate readers.
I think every journalist has those. Yes. Well, again, thank you for being here. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in this week. As always, the Montpelier Happy Hour is on WVEW every Friday at 2. We're broadcasted on Wednesday mornings and wherever you find your podcasts. And take care, everyone. Here's once again wishing you a very good 2026.